You're not even worth half of what your younger sister is, my father growled at my 36th birthday in front of every guest. My mother just smirked and my sister flashed a new watch bought with my money. They thought I was just a convenient ATM, but they didn't know the best part. 5 minutes ago, I stripped them of everything. Dad, you're fired. Effective immediately, I said, and in that moment, their luxury life turned to ash. Listen to the end to find out how I destroyed their empire with a single stroke of a pen. My name is Elena Harlow. Tonight was my 36th birthday, an evening marked by 40 guests, and the soft glow of a sprawling estate in the foothills of Colorado. Crystal glasses shimmered under the chandeliers while a live jazz quartet played near the terrace. Halfway through dessert, my father stood, his wine glass swaying slightly in his hand, and spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. You aren't even half the woman your 16-year-old sister is. My mother offered a sharp, thin smile from across the table. Honestly, Elena, be grateful we still allow you to live under this roof. Clara sat on the velvet sofa, her legs crossed, adjusting the heavy gold watch on her wrist with a dismissive laugh. Exactly. Some of us actually deserve this lifestyle. The room fell into a suffocating silence. 40 pairs of eyes fixed on me. I didn't scream, and I didn't cry. I simply pushed my chair back, letting the legs scrape slowly across the marble floor, and I smiled. Then let her start paying your salary, I said, looking my father directly in the eye. Because, Dad, you're fired. Effective tonight. The glass stopped halfway to his lips. My mother's mouth drifted open. Clara blinked as if she had been struck. You could have heard a single drop of wine hit the rug. If you have ever been treated as disposable by your own blood the moment a younger, shinier version of you appeared, you know the coldness that takes root. I was 18 when my father sat me down in his study and slid a thick envelope across the mahogany desk. Inside was a full-ride scholarship to a prestigious university, a prize I had spent 2 years fighting to earn. He didn't even look up from his screen. We're keeping this money, he told me. Your mother and I might have another child one day. That one will need it more than you. I remember staring at the paper until the ink blurred into nothingness. I didn't argue. I simply nodded, walked out, and applied for every student loan available to a girl with no cosigner. 4 years later, I graduated at the top of my finance class. I returned home with a meticulous business plan, asking my parents to back the incorporation of Harlow Global. My mother laughed first. My father didn't even bother to hide his contempt. Sweetheart, he said, this is a legacy firm. Daughters don't run legacies. When we have a son, or at least someone worthy, we'll talk. They refused to put the family name on anything that belonged to me. So I took a train to the city with 2 suitcases and $23,000 in debt. I rented a studio the size of a pantry and started the company anyway. I cold called every broker in the region and flipped my first commercial lease before my 24th birthday. I never asked them for a single cent again. 10 years later, Harlow Global was managing over 200 commercial properties across the state. Our market value had surpassed $180 million. The board was practically begging me to take the chair. My father, however, still sat on every investor call, wearing the title of chairman like a birthright. On paper, I was the CEO, but he had ensured that every major decision required his signature. He loved reminding the world that the company carried his name, not mine. I smiled during the meetings. I signed where I was told. And quietly, I began moving every new asset into holding companies he didn't even know existed. 14 months ago, I walked into his home office on a quiet Tuesday afternoon with a bottle of his favorite aged scotch and a thick legal folder. Dad, I said, you've been talking about retiring for years. Let's make it official. I offered him the title of Chairman Emeritus. A salary of $750,000 a year, full medical coverage, and the corner office with the panoramic skyline view. Everything a man stepping back could possibly want. My mother clapped as if I had finally come to my senses. He flipped to the last page, scribbled his signature without reading a word past the salary line, and shook my hand like he had just won a trophy. They toasted to my newfound generosity that night. I raised my glass with them and felt absolutely nothing. I had signed that contract for one reason only. Julian Thorne had been my corporate attorney since the day I signed my very first lease in that cramped studio. He knew every shell company, every holding structure, and every line I had ever drawn to protect what I had built. Late one Thursday night, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. "Elena," Julian said the moment I answered, his voice low and urgent. "Your father just emailed me from his corporate account. He wants me to draft a new irrevocable trust." I sat up and switched on the lamp. "Everything," Julian continued. "The operating agreements, the real estate holdings, the cash reserves, it all rolls to Clara the moment she turns 18. Your name isn't mentioned once, not even as a secondary beneficiary." I opened my laptop. Julian had already forwarded the message. My father's signature block still read Richard Harlow, Chairman Emeritus. The instructions were crystal clear: lock me out completely, disguise the transfer as estate planning, and do it quickly. I read the email 3 times. There was no rage, no tears, only the coldest clarity I had ever felt. "Does he realize you are my counsel first?" I asked. "He thinks loyalty is a commodity he can buy," Julian answered. "He offered me a $50,000 bonus to have the documents ready in 2 weeks. I leaned back against the headboard and stared at the ceiling. "Tell him yes. Tell him you'll start immediately. And Julian? Bill every single minute to the company. Because from now on, every cent he spends is on my tab." Julian paused. "You're sure?" "Positive. And from this second forward, you work for me and only me. Double your retainer if you have to. I want a mirror plan, something he will never see coming." I hung up, poured a glass of water, and opened a new encrypted folder on my desktop. I titled it Endgame. That night, I didn't sleep. I mapped every asset, every entity, and every signature authority still floating in my father's name. By sunrise, I had a list of 47 moves that needed to happen in perfect silence. First thing the next morning, I called an emergency board session. No parents were invited. I moved for a vote to name myself the sole managing member of the parent LLC, and the resolution passed unanimously. My father had missed the last 4 meetings anyway. He was too busy enjoying the prestige of his title to bother with the labor of it. Next, I established the Elena Harlow Irrevocable Trust in Delaware. I appointed Julian and 2 independent trustees he vetted, then began the quiet work of transferring ownership. Every new lease, every refinancing, every acquisition, it all flowed straight into the trust. I left the old assets where they were for the time being. I needed the illusion of his control to remain perfectly intact. I kept the corporate credit cards active. I ensured my father's name stayed on the country club roster, and kept the season tickets in his name. I even approved my mother's request for a top-of-the-line SUV for her daily errands. But every swipe, every wire transfer, and every signature went directly into a shadow ledger Julian had built for me. Clara, meanwhile, began posting photos from private jets and 5-star resorts, believing they were early birthday surprises. I watched the charges hit the corporate accounts and simply forwarded them to the forensic accountant I had hired weeks prior. He flagged every single one, personal expenses disguised as client entertainment. The total climbed past $4 million faster than I had anticipated. I scheduled quarterly strategy retreats in coastal resorts and mountain lodges, flying the executive team first class. I made sure my father heard how generous his daughter had become in his semi-retirement. He ate it up. He even called me, saying I was finally acting like a true member of the family in front of the staff. I simply smiled, refilled his glass, and signed the approval for Clara's new penthouse deposit in the city's most exclusive district. Julian sent my father drafts of the fake trust every 10 days, each version looking more ironclad than the last. My father replied with enthusiastic notes. "Perfect," he wrote in one email. "Add a spendthrift clause for Clara. We don't want her blowing through it too fast." Every one of those emails went into the encrypted folder. By the 8th month, the real trust owned 92% of our operating entities. My father still believed he held the reins because the signage hadn't changed, and the checks still carried his name. He had no idea those checks were now drawn on accounts that I alone had the power to freeze. I filed the first whistleblower submission with the authorities anonymously through Julian's firm, attaching 2 years of flagged transactions and corporate statements. The potential reward for such a report would be substantial, but I didn't care about the money. I cared about the leverage. From that day forward, I began moving the final pieces into place. The Elena Harlow Irrevocable Trust was finalized in a quiet law office on a Tuesday morning. No one in the city noticed. 3 independent trustees signed the documents, and Julian filed the paperwork before lunch. From that moment on, the silent migration of the company was complete. On the surface, everything remained the same. The stationery, the office directories, and the bank portals all showed Harlow Global exactly as my father liked it. But underneath, the foundation had shifted. I kept the account thresholds high and the credit lines open. My father used the black card the way he always had, never questioning why the statements no longer crossed his desk. My mother requested wire transfers for household expenses just as she had for 2 decades. I approved them instantly, then mirrored every transaction into the forensic ledger. The internal audit ran on a private server. Each week, a new report landed in my inbox. By the end of the 4th month, we had tracked nearly $3 million moved for Clara's benefit alone. There was the private tuition for a finishing school in Switzerland, billed as employee leadership training. There was a $2 million condo titled directly to a 16-year-old, listed in the books as a marketing internship residence. Then came the first-class deposits for a summer tour across Europe, coded as client site visits. Every line item carried my father's digital approval, or my mother's handwritten note. I printed nothing. I forwarded nothing. I simply let the total climb. Julian scheduled our quarterly trust reviews in person, always at my penthouse after 9 in the evening. We would sit at the kitchen island with 2 laptops and a bottle of mineral water between us. He showed me the rising percentages, 42, 58, 71, 89. Each meeting ended the same way, with one more batch of operating agreements re-registered under the trust. It was one more layer of distance between what my parents thought they controlled and what actually belonged to me. I began requiring 2 signatures on every check over $50,000, mine and my father's. He loved it. He loved the illusion that his name still carried weight. He signed the documents without ever glancing at the memos, which now explicitly referenced the trust as the payee. Clara posted to her social media accounts constantly. There were selfies from the cabins of private jets and photos of designer shopping bags lining the streets of Paris. One caption read, "Living my best life before college even starts." I saved every story, every tag, and every geographic location. My accountant matched the timestamps to the corporate charges within minutes. When my father scheduled a family legacy dinner and bragged to our cousins about the European trust he was finalizing for his favorite daughter, I simply smiled across the table. I complimented the wine, and later that night, while the house was silent, I moved another 11 properties into the trust. By the 6th month, the forensic total of their theft crossed $4 million. Julian walked into my office carrying a single black USB drive. "This is enough for a felony misappropriation charge," he said. I took the drive, plugged it into an isolated laptop, and submitted the whistleblower package to the authorities before midnight. No name, no return address, just 47 pages of bank records, credit statements, and board minutes detailing exactly who had authorized the drain on company funds. The official acknowledgement arrived 9 days later. A case number was assigned, an investigation was opened. I closed the email and booked the venue for my birthday. I chose the same grand ballroom my father had used for his 60th. I hired the same caterer and the same string quartet. I sent the invitations myself, written by hand on heavy cream cardstock. Please help me celebrate 36 years, and the next chapter of Harlow Global. My father called to say he was touched by the gesture. My mother asked if she could bring the diamond-encrusted watch she'd bought for Clara as a table gift. I told them, of course. 3 days before the party, Julian oversaw the installation of a ceiling-mounted projector, cleverly disguised within the housing of the crystal chandelier. Mrs. Maria Delgado, our housekeeper of 23 years, received her own invitation, and a quiet request from me to sit near the front. She looked me in the eye, her expression knowing, and nodded once. Every seat was assigned. Every slide was timed. Every document was triple-checked. I chose my 36th birthday to end the charade. The ballroom was breathtaking. Gold uplighting cast a warm glow over white orchids. The string quartet played soft jazz arrangements as 40 guests in black tie moved through the room, laughing over old deals and new arrivals. My father had already finished 3 bourbons, and was starting on a 4th. My mother floated from table to table in a gown of champagne silk, her earrings flashing every time she turned her head. Clara stood at the center of her usual orbit of cousins and socialites, her phone raised high as she showed off photos on the large screen I'd rented for the supposed slideshow of my life. Look, she announced, her voice carrying across the room. This is the condo Daddy closed on last week. 32nd floor, all mine the day I turn 18. She swiped the screen. And these are the tickets for July. Paris, Rome, the coast. Mom says I deserve it after my exams. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone raised a glass to the next generation. My father slung an arm around Clara's shoulders, his face flushed and his voice booming over the music. That's right, he declared. Some kids earn the world just by existing. Others. He turned, locking eyes with me from across the room, and raised his glass in a mocking salute. Others just take up space. The music continued, but the chatter died away. My mother added, her voice sharp and clear, be grateful we still keep a roof over your head, Elena. Most women your age would kill for this life. Clara flipped her hair. Exactly. Some of us don't need to beg for scraps. 40 faces turned toward me. Phones were lowered, forks froze halfway to mouths. Mrs. Delgado, seated quietly in her simple navy dress, met my gaze and gave the tiniest nod. I set my champagne flute on a nearby table. The clink echoed in the silence. I walked to the center of the room, my heels silent on the marble, and wore the smile I had practiced for weeks. Then let her start paying your salary, I said, my voice calm and perfectly projected. Because, Dad, you're fired tonight. The glass slipped in my father's hand, bourbon splashing across his shoes. My mother's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Clara actually laughed, a short, nervous sound, as if waiting for a punchline that wasn't coming. I lifted one finger. That was the signal. The lights dimmed without warning. The quartet stopped mid-note. A low mechanical hum vibrated from the ceiling, as the crystal chandelier rose on invisible wires, revealing the hidden projector lens. Julian Thorne stepped out from behind the dessert station in a charcoal suit, a remote in his hand. He pressed a button. The screen lit up with the first slide, 20 feet wide, in bold black letters. Harlow Global Employee Termination Notice. Clyde Harlow, Chairman Emeritus. Effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the room like a physical wave. Phones came back up, this time recording. My father stared at the ceiling, his jaw working but no sound emerging. My mother grabbed his arm, her voice a frantic whisper. What is this? Elena, turn it off this instant. I didn't move. Julian clicked the remote. Slide 2, the employment agreement my father had signed 14 months ago. His own looping signature was circled in red on page 14, highlighting the clause, "Employee serves at the pleasure of the board and may be terminated without cause upon written notice." Slide 3, the board resolution from that same week, signed by every director, stripping him of all voting rights. Slide 4, a simple organizational chart. My name sat at the top. His name was crossed out in a thick red line. Clara shrieked. "This is a joke, right? Turn it off." Julian ignored her and kept clicking. Julian's voice cut through the frozen silence, calm and professional, yet utterly merciless. Slide 5, he announced. A single page filled the screen. It was my father's employment contract, with paragraph 17 circled in red. At-will employment. Termination without cause or notice. Severance, 0. My father lunged forward, his face twisting. "This is insane. I own." Slide 6, Julian continued. A spreadsheet replaced the contract. 38 rows of dates, amounts, and descriptions. $180,000 labeled family educational support. 2.1 million labeled future heir residence. 412,000 labeled European cultural enrichment. Every line was traced directly from company accounts to personal ones bearing Clara's name or my mother's maiden name. The guests began to whisper, their phones angled higher to catch the details. My father's face drained of all color. My mother clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Slide 7. A letter appeared on official government letterhead, bearing a federal seal, and a case number. It was dated 8 months earlier. Receipt of whistleblower submission. Investigation opened for potential tax fraud, misappropriation of corporate funds, and filing of false returns. Someone in the back of the room dropped a glass. It shattered against the marble, but Julian didn't pause. Slide 8. A simple declaration of trust. The Elena Harlow Irrevocable Trust, dated 14 months ago. Sole settlor, Elena Harlow. Sole trustee, Elena Harlow. Current assets, 100% of the operating entities, real property holdings, and liquid reserves. My father roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "You can't do this. That company carries my name." Julian clicked again. Slide 9. A filing from the Secretary of State's office. Articles of Amendment. The company name was changed, effective 48 hours from tonight. EH Realty Holdings, LLC. All references to the Harlow name had been legally removed. My mother finally found her voice, her tone a mix of horror and venom. "You ungrateful." Slide 10, Julian said. Formal notices of account closures for every corporate card in my father's wallet and my mother's purse. Effective at midnight. Clara screamed, a high, sharp sound that pierced the room. "Turn it off. She's lying. This is illegal." Julian kept going. Slide 11. Photos pulled from public social media posts. Clara on a yacht in Capri. Clara holding designer shopping bags in Milan. Each image was stamped with the exact corporate charge that had paid for it. The room erupted in murmurs. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years shook his head, looking at the floor. My father tried to charge the stage, but the 2 off-duty officers I had hired for security stepped in front of him without a word. He stopped short, breathing heavily like a cornered animal. My mother collapsed into a chair, her hand over her heart, while Clara continued to shriek, tears streaking mascara down her cheeks. "This is my birthday," she sobbed. "You're ruining everything." I finally spoke, my voice steady and cold. "Actually, this is my birthday gift to myself." Julian clicked to the final slide. A single line in a massive, bold font, "Any questions may be directed to Julian Thorne, counsel for Realty Holdings. All further communication with former employees will go through him. The screen went black. The house lights came up. 40 phones were still recording the wreckage of my family. Mrs. Maria Delgado stood slowly from her seat near the front. She looked straight at my father and spoke in her quiet, firm voice. I watched her build every brick of this company while you watched golf and drank your lunch. God sees everything, Senor Richard. My father's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My mother tried to stand, wobbled, and sat back down hard. Clara ran toward me, her fists clenched, but one of the officers caught her gently by the arm. She dissolved into hysterical sobs against his chest. I walked over to the microphone the quartet had been using. Thank you all for coming, I said. Dessert is still being served. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. No one moved. My father finally found his voice, shaking with rage. You'll never get away with this, Elena. I looked him in the eye, feeling nothing but a profound sense of relief. I already have. Security escorted them out the side door. My mother's heels dragged across the marble. Clara's crying echoed down the hallway until the heavy front doors of the estate slammed shut behind them. My father never looked back. The heavy doors of the estate slammed shut behind them just after midnight. The first legal blow landed 3 weeks later. The authorities froze every account still tied to the Harlow name. My father's club membership was revoked, my mother's luxury spa credits were cancelled. The prestigious credit cards they had carried for decades turned into useless pieces of plastic overnight. By the second month, the formal notice arrived, $11.4 million in back taxes, interest, and penalties. The estate went to the auction block. Bidding started at $8 million and barely crawled to $9 million, eventually sold to a private equity firm from Dallas. It was a gray, rainy Thursday when the moving trucks arrived. My father stood on the front steps in the same worn silk robe he'd owned for 20 years, watching strangers crate up his trophies and antique collections. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom unit in a nondescript suburb, a place with beige carpets and no concierge. My mother cried that first night because the dishwasher was too loud. My father simply stopped shaving. Clara lost her place at her private academy the moment the tuition wire was reversed. The headmaster sent a polite but firm letter stating that immediate withdrawal was required. She was enrolled in the local public high school 20 minutes away. On her first day, she was recognized by students who had seen the viral video of the party, a clip that had already amassed 14 million views. Students filmed her in the hallways, whispering about the girl whose life had been dismantled in front of an audience. They edited the footage of her crying, added mocking music, and kept it pinned to the school's anonymous message boards for weeks. My father tried to enter the country club one last time, hoping his face still held some vestige of power. The manager met him at the gate, apologetic but unyielding. Your membership has lapsed, sir. The payment was declined. He drove home in the 10-year-old luxury sedan that had once been the spare house car. My mother sold her remaining jewelry to a private dealer, returning with $43,000 in cash and a face that looked a decade older. They used the money to hire a tax attorney who lasted exactly 1 meeting. After seeing the forensic file, he gave them the only truth left. There is no defense. You can plea or go to trial, but a trial is a guaranteed loss. Clara's phone was flooded with messages from former friends, none of them kind. She stopped posting updates. Eventually, she stopped leaving the apartment altogether. My own phone rang incessantly. I saw blocked numbers and heard frantic voicemails I never played. There were texts from my mother claiming they were still my parents, and messages from my father saying I'd made my point, and it was time to talk. Clara sent 67 messages in a single day, ranging from desperate bargaining to tearful threats. I read none of them twice. I deleted the threads without a word. Julian forwarded the legal wreckage, settlement demands, lien schedules, and foreclosure notices. I signed nothing that helped them. I signed everything that finished the job. Realty Holdings posted its most profitable quarter in history. Investors who once bowed to my father were now lining up at my door. We expanded our reach into Phoenix and Salt Lake City before the summer ended. My father eventually took a part-time consulting gig for a small-time broker, earning $40 an hour. He asked the owner not to use his full name on the company website. My mother began volunteering at a local charity shop because the oppressive silence of the apartment was worse than the labor. Clara dyed her hair a dark, muddy brown, took the bus to school, and told her new teachers her last name was Smith. One Sunday morning, my father appeared at my office building. I watched him on the security feed, thin, unkempt, holding a plain manila envelope like a white flag. I instructed the front desk to say I was in Singapore. He left the envelope and walked away. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I was wrong. I'm sorry. There was no signature. I dropped it into the shredder without a second thought. I have since moved to the top floor of a glass tower in the heart of the city. The elevator opens directly into my penthouse. There is no doorman to announce me, and no one waits in the hallway with opinions I never sought. There is only floor-to-ceiling glass and the sprawling skyline, looking as though it were built for me alone. Realty Holdings closed the last fiscal year with over $400 million in assets under management. We own the newest high-rises on the main boulevard, and every major commercial lease from here to the coast. The board meets in a room that bears my name on the door in brushed steel, no legacy surname attached. When new partners ask about the previous branding, my team simply tells them that the chapter is closed. No one pushes for more. They can find the wreckage online if they wish. I kept the people who stood by me when the cameras were rolling that night. Mrs. Delgado runs my household now and sits on the board of my charitable foundation. Julian was made a senior partner last quarter. The analysts who once flinched when my father walked into a room now send me birthday cards with genuine respect. I date when I choose. I sleep peacefully. I fly private because the company owns the jet, not because someone else granted me permission. Some nights I still come across an old family photograph that survived the purge. For people on a yacht years ago, all smiling as if nothing could ever break our world. I look at the girl I was then, her eyes full of a hope I no longer possess, and I don't recognize her. I don't hate her, but I don't miss her either. She did what was necessary to become me. Regret never visits. Guilt never calls. The space they might have occupied is filled with something much quieter, certainty. I have learned that blood is merely biology. Family is the short list of people who choose to stand in the fire with you when the heat is real. My circle is small, deliberate, and unbreakable. Tonight, I stand on the balcony, barefoot, with the city lights flickering far below. A cold wind cuts across the terrace, sharp and clean. I pour a drink, raise the glass to the empty air, and speak the only truth that remains. Family isn't the place where you were born. It is the place that refuses to let you go when everything you built has turned to ash and everyone else has walked away. I take a drink. The skyline watches with me. Silent. Bright. Mine. I look at that girl in the frame, the one with the longer hair and the eyes that still held a flicker of hope, and I realize I don't recognize her anymore. I don't harbor any hatred for her. She simply did what was necessary to pave the way for the woman I have become. Regret never comes to visit. Guilt never bothers to call. The space they might have occupied in someone else's heart is filled with something much quieter here. Certainty. I have finally learned that blood is nothing more than biology. True family is the short list of people who choose to stand in the fire with you when the flames are real. Mine is small, deliberate, and unbreakable. Tonight, I am on the balcony, barefoot, watching the city lights pulse 48 floors below. A sharp November wind sweeps across the terrace, smelling of frost and cold stone. I pour 2 fingers of bourbon, raise the glass to the empty night, and speak the only truth that still carries weight. Family isn't the house where you were born. It is the sanctuary that refuses to let you go when everything else you built has turned to ash, and the rest of the world has walked away. I take a drink. The skyline drinks with me. Silent. Bright. Mine. That is where the story ends. If you have stayed until this final line, I thank you. If there is someone in your life who ever tried to make you feel small for daring to be something more, remember this: you do not owe your future to the people who bet against your past. Build your own table. Sign your own name. And when the moment is right, do not hesitate to flip the board. My name is Elena Harlow. This is my city, my company, and my life.